Welcome back, you pugnacious pummelers. I'm Lupinefiasco, this is Daily FaB Gameplay, and today we are playing Jarl Vetreidi. For anyone who's new to the channel, what we do here is review replays of games I played on the Talishar.net client days or weeks ago. After enough time has passed, that I lose my bias and can more objectively judge the quality of my games. I will talk through turn cycles as if I were taking them now, explaining my thought processes for the lines I would take and comparing them to the lines I did take. We either learn from my mistakes or reinforce good play patterns with the overall goal of tightening and optimizing our gameplay in the future to take down paper events and walk away with that shiny cardboard. If you would like to check out the deck I'm playing here or try it for yourself on Talishar, there is a FaB deck link in the video description below. While you're down there, if you haven't already done so, please consider a YouTube subscription. It's the best free way to support me and to make sure that you see daily FaB gameplay in your video feed 5 days a week. I have a Blue Sky, I have a Discord, and I have a Patreon where you can find the matchup guide for this deck list. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into the action. Buckle up, everyone. This will be a long game. Against Riptide, we lost the die roll and were chosen to go first. And the hand that we draw into is pretty good to take advantage of that. We get to play Imposing Visage. The question is, are we finding Crumble to Eternity or are we finding Channel Lake Frigid? I think Channel Lake is more useful in this specific situation where we want to slow Riptide down, but the problem with finding Channel Lake is that we would have to pitch our entire hand because we need X to be equal to 2, which means that playing Imposing Visage would cost 5 resources. If X is equal to 0, we can pitch 1 card and find Crumble to Eternity and get an arsenal. So what I actually want to do is play Imposing for X equals 1, so that I can pitch Icequake to play the Imposing Visage, and then find Crumble to Eternity and put the -1 counter on New Horizon. Trench will probably be more useful to Riptide overall, but what we get from putting a -1 counter on New Horizon is the ability to play Frozen to Death, destroy the New Horizon, which also destroys Riptide's arsenal, so potentially getting some extra value on that Frozen to Death turn, and compensating for the loss of tempo that we might generate by not dealing any damage. We also get to Arsenal Rootbound Carapace, and what I like about Arsenaling Rootbound is that we now get to play it to defend against an arrow. Riptide's Dreadbore says that we cannot play defense reactions from hand on any chain link with an arrow in it. So if we end up pitching this Rootbound and draw into it later on maybe a turn where we need to defend as life totals get lower, we put ourselves into a position where we can't actually play it. We won't be able to decompose the Rootbound if we play it on our next turn, but we get it out of our deck and we get an Earth card into the graveyard. So I think that putting the Rootbound into the arsenal is what I want to do with this hand, and I also want to find Crumble to Eternity, and it appears that I'm taking the same line here. Of course, that Crumble is going to go on New Horizon. So this is Vero's Count Your Blessings Jarl deck. Our plan going into Riptide is going to be to sledge as often as possible. Great turn cycle for us would be to pitch 2 blues, sledge for 6, and then play a Count Your Blessings, and just sustain through Riptide's arrows. He has his Remembrance Quiver. It's entirely possible that Riptide also just has Remembrance, but our sledge is playable as long as we have 1 blue in the deck and our Tunic available. Riptide does not have a weapon that can attack. Eventually he will run out of arrows, and at that point he just loses the game. So we just need to survive. We've got an Erase Face coming in for 6. Riptide reloads. Because we cannot defend arrows from hand with defense reactions, I want to play Rootbound Carapace now, and I'd also like to block with Channel Mount Ison. It's a little unfortunate because Channel Mount is going to be one of our win conditions later in the game, but we preserve life total now. We get to use our root bound, and then we can pitch Blizzard and Pummel to Sledge for 6. It will have Dominate, so we can push a little damage, and we get to keep our root bound Carapace in Arsenal. What's really nice about Sledge is it doesn't trigger any of Riptide's traps. It has 6 power, so it isn't gaining power as it attacks. It doesn't have Go Again. We're not attack reacting onto the Sledge unless we wanted to play a Pummel, but none of Riptide's traps will actually trigger against the Sledge, so he isn't getting any extra value from it. So I do just want to play Rootbound here and block with Channel Mount, and we'll pitch Pummel and just put it back into our deck to find later. There's no real world where I want to defend with Rootbound Carapace, take 3 from the Erase Face, and then, pitch 6 to Sledge and Pummel. I want to save the Pummels for Command & Conquer's, Oaken Olds, turns where they are going to be relevant and push a relevant on-hit, even if it is just the Pummels on-hit. Sending a 3-card 10 with Riptide at 38 with 63 cards still in deck just doesn't really interest me in any way. Playing the Rootbound from Arsenal says that what I'm probably looking to do here is Sledge, pitching Blizzard and Rootbound, and then Arsenal the Pummel, and while that does work to set up a big Pummel CNC, Pummel Frostfang, Pummel Oakenold turn, it means that I am going to fall into this trap later of having Rootbound in hand at a time where I probably can't play it. And if we're intending to take this game to second or even third cycle, it really doesn't matter that we are pitching the Pummel. We're going to see it later, and there's going to be something that we can line up with it. Maybe that something would be a Sledge, but we're also doing it at a point in the game when we've already seen Buzzsaw Trap, Boulder Trap, the traps that Riptide would play that benefit from us giving extra power to our hammer, and I'm fine playing Pummel at that point. We might just be trying to sneak some damage through, right? Our win condition here is just drawing the game out until such a time that we can just fatigue Riptide. Checking the graveyard, we do have the ability to decompose with Felling of the Crown. The Felling only attacks for 4, but it does have its decompose effect. So what I might want to do with this hand is block with E-Strike, discard fruits to gain 2 life, and then play Felling. Decompose by banishing 2 earth cards and 1 non-earth card, and then we have fruits and Felling in our graveyard so that we can decompose again when we finally get to that point in the game. Depending on what Riptide does, we could just E-Strike for 5 Go Again, and then attack with Felling. We've got the CNC coming in for 6. We could Crown in order to bottom our arsenal and then draw a new card. We take 4 damage. Our turn would probably look like E-Strike for 5 Go Again, discard fruits to gain 2, and then play Felling. But I don't really want to use my Crown this early, and I think that I'm okay just blocking for 6 using E-Strike and Channel Lake Frigid to cover up this Command & Conquer. We aren't exactly losing premium cards in the form of Channel Lake. E-Strike is a little more valuable, but I think saving the Crown is fine. We have a really good 2-card play here with Felling. We can decompose, we can sit on our Pummel, our Tunic will be up for when we draw into Frostfang or Command & Conquer, and we can just wait. We can just wait out the Riptide until he draws a hand that is not very good, and I want to save my Crown for a time when I can't block the Command & Conquer from hand. We've got our 6 Count Your Blessings in deck. There are going to be hands that we draw into that just don't function defensively, and that is the point where I want to Crown away my arsenal. So notably, we had to pitch our fruits to play this Felling. We couldn't discard it to gain life, and that means that after the Felling resolves and goes to graveyard, we only have 1 earth card in our graveyard. I can either start aggressively blocking with my Gauntlets of Boreal Domain to get it into the graveyard, or I can just block with another earth card. But definitely something worth considering, that we currently cannot decompose. And unfortunately, this hand also doesn't let us decompose. Now what we get to do with this hand is play Fused Oakenold, assuming that Riptide doesn't do anything really to us. We've got a battering bolt coming in for 7, but our hand is entirely comprised of actions. So we can take 7, go to 33. We won't have to discard any of our cards. We then get to use our Tunic and Boulder Drop to pay for Oaken Old. We can double fuse it with Felling and Icequake. And then what we can even do so that we don't suffer such an intellect penalty, and especially not one with 2 red cards, we can just pitch Felling and Icequake to play Pummel from Arsenal. And that even puts our Icequake and Felling next to each other so that we could try to line up a Tunic turn with a blue to Icequake Felling for 11 with the Felling effect and on-hit Frostbite. So I really like just taking 7 here. If I wanted to get aggressive with my blocking, I could block with Gauntlets here, and I probably should, just to line them up to get the second block out of them to put them into Graveyard for Decompose. So I think if anything, that's the mistake that I make, is not blocking with Gauntlets there just to set it up for Graveyard, but keeping 5 cards here to pummel fused Oakenold sounds fantastic. We get got by Buzzsaw Trap, and that's kind of the only thing we get got by. But even Buzzsaw Trap is probably not enough to cover the actual hit effect of Oakenold and Pummel, so Riptide's still going to lose a number of cards to this attack. See how Riptide chooses to address the Oakenold here. No reactions. We are going to Pummel first. I do want to get these cards out of my hand. We've got a Boulder Trap from Riptide, which is going to put a -1 counter on some of our equipment, but the real scary trap here is Buzzsaw, just because it takes away the extra attack power we generated from Oakenold's effect and from Pummel. And Riptide putting the -1 counter on our Crown of Providence is less value for Riptide, but is also worse for us. We really wanted him to put it on Gauntlets of Boreal Domain, which would make up for us not blocking with it last turn. Ordering the Pummel effect to go first says that Riptide has to discard one of his 2 cards rather than bottom both, and that is just playing with a consideration to fatigue. So the hand we draw into here, very similar to our last one, but unfortunately Boulder Drop being yellow says that we can't just play and fuse Oakenold again. So we'll see what we want to do with this hand. We have a Sedation Shot coming in for 3. The on-hit here is Inertia, which we could just take and have our turn be something like pitch Boulder Drop, play Frostfang, bottom Felling, and Oakenold. I don't like that, just because we, one, already have 2 reds and a yellow next to each other, so bottoming 2 more reds says that we're going to have a very clunky draw at some point, 53 cards down the line. I don't like that. Blocking with Felling is a little unfortunate because it's one of our power cards, but it does cover the Sedation Shot effect. It puts another Earth card into the graveyard for decomposing our last Felling or any of our Plow Unders. It says that we get to pitch Boulder Drop to play Frostfang, and then Arsenal and Oakenold. So I like blocking with Felling here, covering up the Sedation Shot, getting a decent turn cycle out of our remaining 3 cards, and then even putting Oakenold into the arsenal. We have 2 Crumbles and a Pulse of Isenloft left in our deck. That says that we get to double fuse Oakenold with 1 card. So instead taking the 3 damage and the Inertia here to keep Felling of the Crown around, let's see what I do with it. Notably realizing weight, Boulder Drop pitches for 2 instead of 3, asking for and receiving the undo. So let's see if I do now realize how bad my hand is and if I decide to block with the Felling. So it took me a while. Took me a second to remember that yellow's pitch for 2, not 3, but we eventually find the correct line. And of course that hand was salvageable. If we take the Sedation Shot, right, it isn't the worst thing in the world to have 5 non-blues next to each other, but giving up the Felling hurts. This is much better. we get to set up the dominated Oakenold for a future turn. Frostfang represents a relevant on-hit. And if we get to trade one card in our deck for 2 cards out of Riptides, that feels pretty good. Riptide started, I believe, 4 cards above our deck count, and we are currently approaching being ahead of him. Riptide giving us the Perch Grapplers here is fantastic. Opening up an armor slot says that Jarl now has text. The hand that we draw into, unfortunately, does not fuse for Oakenold. We only have Earth cards, we don't have any Ice. And we have this Rootbound Carapace in hand that we can't actually play. So we have Remorseless coming in for 6. We could cover this with Plow Under and CNC, and then our turn is probably just Sledge for 6, pitching Rootbound and Fruits. That isn't very exciting. The Remorseless here isn't really that impactful. We're only going to do one thing on our turn, so we would take 7 damage overall. Thinking about how I want to block this, I would need to check my discard. I believe we have 2 Earth cards in there, but of course the problem with playing Plow is that it affects us as well. It affects our Oakenold that we have to bottom. So the best way to use this hand might just be to block with CNC and Plow Under, and then Sledge for 6. I just really hate that because we're giving up 2 of our remaining power cards, 2 of our remaining attacks, in order to prevent what is effectively vanilla damage. But because we have this awkward Rootbound Carapace, there might not be a better way to use this hand. What we could do is block with Plow Under and then CNC for 6, overpitching Rootbound and Fruits just to cycle cards out of our hand. And I think that might be the best thing I can do with this. I take effectively 4 points of damage and return 6, keeping cards in our hand, but you can really see why these Rootbound Carapaces are not good in the Riptide matchup, just because of the Dreadbore effect. So it might actually be worth boarding them out in the future, and that's something I'm going to have to think about. With my own list, we don't have Rootbound Carapace, but I do play Sink Below, and it has the exact same problem with Dreadbore here. Let's see what I decide to do. If I was going to block with Plow Under or CNC, I would rather block with Plow. Using the Crown here to cycle Oakenold to the bottom of our deck doesn't really do anything. I guess my line is maybe I draw a red, and then I get to pitch 2 reds to Plow, and I can discard Fruits. Bottoming the Rootbound Carapace seems like the worst line, because now still I'm going to Plow Under, and I'm going to bottom my own Oakenold. Now that being said, I do draw Channeling Frigid, which is a nice card, so instead of having to worry about if your Plow Under is going to bottom your own arsenal, or maybe you draw the red and your hand is a little awkward, you could just be the best Flesh and Blood player and draw the Ice card you need to double fuse Oakenold. And we even get to Arsenal a Plow Under after this. So I'm really glad I spent all that time talking about the ideal way to play out that turn cycle, because all I needed to do was crown into the Ice card I needed to fuse Oakenold. So that was definitely the right line, something I should have considered, but I do think that there were better ways to play that turn that conserve equipment, again, just for a point in the game where we can't block, and maybe we need to. Maybe we do get attacked by a Command and Conquer, and we have 3 Count Your Blessings in hand, and we really do want to save our arsenal. Pushing 6 points of damage, getting 2 random cards out of Riptide's hand, and getting to Arsenal a Plow Under is really the best case scenario here. We're up 11 points. We haven't drawn any of our Count Your Blessings yet, but we are now potentially looking at a hand that would let us Plow Under, Tunic, Count Your Blessings. Drawing into the 3rd Oakenold is nice. Unfortunately, Command and Conquer is red. We cannot play and double fuse Oakenold, so we are going to have to navigate this turn a little differently, and we couldn't even play Channeling Frigid if we wanted to, because we don't have the Ice card to bottom for its flow cost. Riptide playing Codex, we have an arsenal, so we don't have to discard, but we will see what Riptide wants to pick up with the Codex, and then decide how we want to block based on that. Coming in with a Sleep Dart for 5, this is not terribly exciting. Thinking about what we want to do with this hand, probably looking to block the Sleep Dart effect, though we don't need to based on the fact that we aren't intending to use our hero power on the next turn. We can play the Plow Under, which will have an effect. Riptide is going to ponder a card for the Arsenal, which we will make him bottom, and because we are playing Plow Under from Arsenal, we don't have to bottom our card. Symmetrical effects are very exciting when you are not the victim of that symmetry. So how do we want to deal with the Sleep Dart while also recognizing that we want to keep threats in our deck? I think the line is blocking with Channel Lake Frigid, taking 2, being slept, and then either pitching Command and Conquer and Fruits to play Plow Under and Decomposing, or more likely using Tunic and Command and Conquer to play Plow Under, and then discarding Fruits to gain 2 and arsenaling Oakenold. Using the CNC here makes sense for what our turn cycle is going to look like. We can pitch Channel Lake to play Plow Under and then discard Fruits, and we keep our Tunic counter, but I think it's more important to keep a red in deck than it is to keep our Tunic counter up. Yes, we have 2 pummels. Yes, we are starting to find our Count Your Blessings hopefully sometime soon, and then Tunic becomes a little more valuable. But we have plenty of ways to use our Count Your Blessings, and we don't really mind burning resources here. This game is going to go so long, and our primary win condition is fatigue, so we really don't care how long the game goes as long as we are just playing those Count Your Blessings. So it would have been fine to use Tunic here and just keep that Command and Conquer in deck rather than keep Channel Lake Frigid in deck. By the time we find this Channel Lake Frigid, the attacks should not matter very much. Certainly mattering less than sending a 6-power, 2-cost attack that Riptide cannot play defense reactions against. But Riptide putting down at least 3 points of block, 6 points even. It's great news for us. We get to Arsenal and Oakenold, and while we are still behind Riptide in card count, we are steadily starting to catch up. The hand that we draw into is just not very good. We can do things with it, but overall, just not an exciting series of cards. I do want to block the Sedation Shot. I don't really want to lose my Oakenold, and I don't want to take damage for no reason. So the question is, what are we choosing to save? I think we do want to save one of our E-Strikes to attack with, though at the same time, still anticipating playing around Riptide's traps. We haven't seen any of them yet, except for one Boulder Trap, but if we've seen one, we can assume there are 2 more. So sending E-Strike for 7 does open us up to potentially getting blown out. What we could do is block with an E-Strike and a Tear Asunder, and then sledge for 6, pitching E-Strike and Tear Asunder, and I think that is the best way to play out this turn. Still holding on to that Tunic resource, notably if we had used the Tunic 2 turns ago to, or last turn to Plow Under, it would be at 1. We would not be impacted by not having an active Tunic, and we can even track on our next turn to see would we have been impacted by not having an available Tunic. Playing the Sledge here, as opposed to E-Strike for 7, loses us 1 point of damage, which is fine. We don't mind giving up 1 point of damage on turn 8. We're expecting this game to go much longer. It plays around Riptide's traps, and it keeps 2 cards in the deck, as opposed to just 1 card. So I do really, really like this play. Riptide blocks with the Shearing Shot, takes 3 damage, going to 15. And we can see what he is intending to do with 3 cards. Drawing into our first Count Your Blessings here, also drawing into the ability to double fuse Oakenold. Riptide plays the Battering Bolt, which is kind of unfortunate for us. We would have liked to not need to worry about anything that Riptide is doing on his turn, so that we could get our Tunic value by potentially just sending 4 cards. What we can do instead is pitch our Boulder Drop in order to play Count Your Blessings. Before the Battering Bolt effect happens, we will gain 2 life and then lose 7, so effectively losing 5 life. We don't have to discard to the Battering Bolt effect. Then we can use Tunic and Plow Under to play Oaken Old, double fusing with Crumble to Eternity, and then not blocking with, not arsenaling Crumble. So we take an intellect penalty, but we do hold on to the Crumble. I just hate arsenaling it. We could block for 6, 7 even, using our gauntlets, Plow Under, and Boulder Drop. And then on our turn, we use Tunic and Crumble to attack with Sledge, or we could use Count Your Blessings and Crumble to attack with Sledge. That just seems much worse to me. We have life to give, especially now that we are starting to find Count Your Blessings. So I think net losing 5 here and just sending the last Oaken Old, which also puts us into a position to benefit from our One of Remembrance, is a good idea. I like saying no blocks. Before the Battering Bolt effect resolves in resolution, we play Count Your Blessings, pitching Boulder Drop, or Plow Under, it really doesn't matter. And then on our turn, using our Tunic and our Yellow Pitch to double fuse Oaken Old. It appears that that's what I'm choosing to do. We can also play Count Your Blessings in reactions, it really doesn't matter. You have multiple windows with which to play the instant before the Battering Bolt effect resolves. So going from 31 to 26, Riptide keeping the arsenal. We could also just play Plow Under, but losing our own Oaken Old seems worse. I decide to do that. I wonder if I just didn't see the line to fuse the Oaken Old. It isn't like we're even... I mean, I guess we don't take an intellect penalty because technically we are not holding onto a card at the end of the turn. But this is just much worse than playing the Oaken Old. We even potentially would have gotten Inertia trapped on the Oaken Old, which would have been fantastic because then we just bottom the Crumble anyway. See if Riptide is going to play another trap out of Arsenal. And if that trap would have been enough to stop the Oaken Old effect, it would not have been, and we would have even, although notably, we would not have had the resource available to pay for the Tar Pit trap, or the Tripwire trap. So this kind of worked out. We still have an Oaken Old in the deck, but I don't think that that was a good decision. More of a decision that just happened to work out. This is a good hand to draw into. We've got Commanding Hawker. We can pitch Imposing Presence to pay for it. We can then use our Tunic to play Count Your Blessings. And then Arsenal is So Tomorrow. So Tomorrow can get back an Oaken Old, which is even better considering that we just pitched a Crumble to Eternity. So Oaken Old, 2 Oaken Olds and a Crumble will come up together, and if we can find a blue with that, then we get to stagger 2 Oaken Olds, which is kind of neat. And of course, playing So Tomorrow from Arsenal just draws us a new card, so potentially putting us into a position to do something very cool with a 5-card hand, or even just letting us play more defensively and then still Sledge on our next turn. And we finally get to put this Tunic resource to use. Riptide can use the Trench to keep cards in deck, though of course it still takes a card away from him on his next turn. We get to play Count Your Blessings, which will gain us 4 life, taking us up to 28. This is a very cursed matchup for Ranger. Riptide in particular doesn't really have a ton he can do about what we are doing here. The hand that we draw into kind of sucks. We just don't have a good way to spend all of the cards in our hand. What we can do is play Frostfang, pitching Crumble to Eternity, and then using Another Frostfang to arsenaling the other Frostfang. Now that we're getting threatened by Sedation Shot, our turn looks a little different. We can pitch Crumble to play Frostfang. We can then at the very least pitch our second Frostfang to play Counter Blessings, but having the So Tomorrow in Arsenal is going to affect our options. I really just don't want to block here. I want to keep my reds in deck, even if they are getting bottomed to Inertia. This is just 4 damage. The on-hit is not particularly relevant, and we will have a way to use 5 cards here, even if it is just inefficiently pitching. So taking 4 here makes a lot of sense. If I had a better way to block this arrow, I would have considered it. Even if one of these 2 Frostfangs was a blue 3 block, I'd be happier to give that and Gauntlets, so that I could think about maybe arsenaling a Counter Blessings, playing So Tomorrow, then Frostfang. But as it is, I still have things to do with this hand. So, opening up with So Tomorrow, we can, we could have thought about pitching the Frostfang just in case we drew into, Oakenold after we weirdly didn't shuffle our deck properly. Ultimately doesn't matter. So we're playing the Frostfang here. Jarl is going to give Riptide his first Frostbite. We have multiple options of how we want to use the 3 cards in our hand based on what Riptide does about the Frostfang. If Riptide doesn't block the Frostfang, then what I want to do is play Counter Blessings so that we don't get got by any kind of defense reactions by another Boulder Trap or a Buzzsaw Trap. If Riptide does block the Frostfang, then I do want to pummel, because that would indicate to me that he does not have a defense reaction. So it all comes down to whether Riptide blocks this and how he blocks this. Riptide almost giving us the trench and then instead showing us that he wants to use it rather than block with it. This is fine. We're going to have to bottom the Frostfang to the Inertia, but if we are keeping it in hand, Riptide just doesn't know that we have it. I don't know what the trench tells us about Riptide's decision. It does tell me that I wanted to Counter Blessings instead. As I said, if Riptide blocks the Frostfang, that's when I want to pummel. But if Riptide doesn't block, it tells me that he has defense reactions that he wants to play. And especially if Riptide is opening up the arsenal, that tells me that it may be play a defense reaction from hand, reload a defense reaction, play that defense reaction. And especially if, in this case, Riptide is playing 2 defense reactions from hand, then we don't benefit from the pummel or the Frostfang effect. So Riptide takes some damage to pull this off. We take some damage in return from 2 Riptide triggers. Riptide probably doesn't get a turn next turn, but we also don't get to keep an arsenal. So rather than pushing 3 points of damage here, I would have rather gained 4 points and probably still gotten those traps out of Riptide. And the hand that we draw into is kind of weird. We could play Frozen to Death, fuse it with Channel Lake Frigid, destroy New Horizon, give Riptide 2 Frostbites, and potentially get the arsenal. Or we could just sledge Counter Blessings and arsenal another Counter Blessings, which sounds way more exciting to me than sniping the New Horizon. I don't particularly care about getting 1 more card out of Riptide's arsenal. We don't even get the card out of Riptide's arsenal because he can trench it away in response to the Frozen to Death, and we use 2 Counter Blessings. We've already played 2, we've seen another one that we just pitched, so we only have 1 more coming up, and after that we have to go through 38 more cards before we get back to our Counter Blessings. I would like to be playing them more actively, so let's instead just 3-card 10 with Sledge, and then playing yellow Counter Blessings, and we'll arsenal red Counter Blessings, which also just gives us an opportunity to bait Riptide into playing Command and Conquer, and then we dodge the on-hit effect by playing out our arsenal at instant speed. So that is the decision I make in the past as well. Sending Sledge for 6. This cannot be trapped in any way. The traps would just be defense reactions that prevent the incoming damage, but we also get to gain 4 life on top of this. Playing the red Count Your Blessings instead, I don't think that decision really matters as far as do we play the red or the yellow first. I guess the red does give us more life in some weird situation where that matters, but ultimately I do not think that we don't care. So what we've got now is probably the exact same play where we are going to, now we can work a Winter's Bite into our turn cycle. We would get a card out of Riptide's hand, give him a Frostbite, and then Sledge Count Your Blessings. Riptide using the Remembrance Quiver here, putting 3 arrows back into deck, but ultimately not applying any pressure to us. We are still very close in card count. We have a Remembrance in our deck as well. And our turn cycle is just going to use 1 or 2 cards from deck while getting 2 cards out of Riptides. I like opening with the Winter's Bite here. Sledge Count Your Blessings. We'll just keep our Count Your Blessings in Arsenal. We don't really have a line where we tear asunder. Well, I suppose we do, but tear asunder Sledge just opens us up to defense reactions, and again puts us into a position where we are pitching Count Your Blessings instead of playing them, and I want to be playing them because I want to gain as much life as I can while I have the opportunity to do so. We aren't under any pressure, so this is just the time to get ahead on life total and maintain a fairly consistent deck size. Opening up with the Sledge, Riptide is going to give us an arrow. Playing a Tripwire Trap, we even have the Tunic to pay for this, which is really helpful. So we can afford to pay to prevent taking 2 damage and then still Tunic out a Count Your Blessings. And that is, in fact, what we decide to do. And the hand that we draw into, unfortunately, just doesn't really work well with the pummel. If we had an attack here, I'd be happy to play it. Unfortunately, we have seen all 3 of our Command and Conquers, so we could still be at risk of getting Buzzsaw trapped here. But what I'm probably going to want to do with this hand, well, now we've got an Endless Arrow coming in for 5. The on hit says that it will go back to Riptide's hand, which means that it will go back to his arsenal. We could cover this with 2/2 blocks, maybe a Winter's Bite and a Sow tomorrow, and then block with our gauntlets to cover it up. And then our turn is just Sledge for 6. But what we can also do is take the 5, let Riptide get his Endless Arrow back into hand, then we play Winter's Bite, give Frostbite, get a card out of Riptide, pitch 2 blues to Sledge, play our 5th Count Your Blessings, and then arsenal a pummel in its place, and that sounds really exciting to me. We still have a Frostfang. We could draw into our Oakenolds again. The pummel would be sitting there for a while, but we have things to do with a pummel. So again, just Winter's Bite, getting options away from Riptide, and then sending a pretty decent 2-card 10. 3-card 10. I know how to count. I know how spending cards from deck works. Riptide pitching another Remembrance. Pitching Remembrance, showing us Remembrance. So Riptide also definitely intending to go to Fatigue. If we didn't already know that, now we do. Though at the same time, giving us a Searing Shot on defense is good for me. Searing Shot being just a 1-card 5. 1-card 6 with Dreadbore even if it hits, and we do just push a little damage over the top of blocks, keep ourselves at 33, and now we're pretty far away from another one of our remembrances from the last remembrance. So unlikely that we are going to, or from the Count Your Blessing, so unlikely that we're going to see it anytime soon. We do just have 33 life to play with for a while. and we will see what exactly we need to do about Riptide's turn. We have the option to play Channel Mount Ison, then play Icequake and Plow Under. We lose our Pummel, at least for the time being. We do just bottom it if we decompose. I'm not terribly concerned about that. We've got a Murky Water coming in for, I believe this will be 8 with Dominate. Because of its own effect, the aim counter, and but it wasn't loaded with Dreadbore, so it is just 7 with Dominate. We can't block that out, so I'm not even going to try. The question is, do I want to block for value from a hand? We can block with Channel Mount Ison. On our turn, we can Icequake, Plow Under, and I do like using the Plow Under Decompose here because of Murky Water's effect, saying that Riptide will get a trap for the arsenal. So what I think I want to do here is actually block with Channel Mount Ison rather than playing it, though now that I'm reevaluating the board state, Riptide has 2 open equipment slots. So if we play Channel Mount Ison, then play Icequake, Riptide gets 2 Frostbites. We pitch our Blizzard, which pays for the Channel Mount flow cost, and then Plow Under comes in for 9, and we bottom our Pummel. But that sounds great to me. I'm super on board with this play. We don't have to play the Pummel, or we don't have to decompose with Plow Under if we did think that Riptide was maybe going to block in such a way that he would take lethal damage from Icequake plus Pummel for 13. The cards that Riptide shows us are Pitfall Trap, Boulder Trap, and Tar Pit Trap. So nothing that prevents us from gaining power this turn, but I still don't want to go for the big Pummel play because we haven't seen Buzzsaw Trap yet. So I like the Channel Mount Ison, Icequake, Plow Under, Decompose line. We are pushing 9 points of damage with 2 Frostbites. That would potentially be lethal damage as well. Pitching Channel Mount Ison instead just seems like a very weird decision. I don't know what I'm going to do with the Blizzard. Choosing to Sledge instead just seems bad. I guess I'm putting myself into a position where I can Pummel, but I would have rather Plow Under. This is a bad line, in my opinion. We don't need to do this. We don't need to take the intellect penalty. We don't need to keep this Pummel. We do see the Buzzsaw Trap, though. So good to know that we correctly called it. At this point, we can't Pummel in any way. There's no way to sequence this so that Buzzsaw Trap does not apply to our attack reactions. It does just say that we can no longer gain power, and any power that we did gain doesn't happen. Pitfall Trap here does not tax us because we have a floating resource. Overall, I just didn't like this line. The Plow Under Icequake would have been a little better. Now, we do keep a Pummel. We do know that Riptide does not have a Buzzsaw Trap anymore. That said, if we Plow Under, unlikely that Riptide will not block in such a way that we can get him with the Pummel. Got the E-Strike coming in for 7. I think blocking with Pulse of Eisenloft here is fine. We'll just play it, pitch a Frozen to Death. On our turn, we Plow Under, pitch Frozen to Death. And we don't have to decompose. Our Plow Under is just on, and if Riptide doesn't have an arsenal, then it doesn't look suspicious that we aren't decomposing. So don't mind that play. Our other line could just be blocking with Pulse of Eisenloft and then pitching Frozen to Death and Plow Under to Sledge for 6. We'll have our Tunic available, so we would still have a resource floating and Tunic to pay for Pummel if Riptide maybe just blocked with a 3 block rather than blocking for 6. Maybe we catch him without a defense reaction and we get to just end the game with Pummel. So I think sledging here is correct, and that is the decision I make in this game as well. Plow under without value from decomposing, just there's no reason to do it instead of sledge. Our turn is not impacted at all. We're attacking for 6. We have the potential pummel if we need to just end the game. And in this way, we're keeping a real threat in our deck rather than not. Riptide here blocking for 5. I don't see the point in pummeling to take him down to 2, especially when we draw into our Flourish. Flourish would work with pummel if we wanted it to. At the same time, we can just have it work with Icequake, and even still putting ourselves into a position where pummel is going to be lethal, we can play Flourish, then pitch to play Icequake. Icequake will give our sledge +5, then, which means it's coming in for 11, and then we could pummel to make it 15, which seems a lot better than what I'm doing here, though I do understand now. We don't want Riptide to get the trap. Though, I'd have to look. I'd have to see if Murky Water gets its benefit from hitting even if it doesn't have an aim counter. Let's go ahead and do a quick little search here. Okay, it is just an on hit, so I do agree with that block. Just continuing to fatigue Riptide. We are about at card parity. Here we're drawing into that initial Rootbound Carapace that we pitched and saying, yes, this is bad. We don't want it here because we will not be able to play it to defend against this Infecting Shot. The Infecting Shot comes in for 6. We don't have a good way to cover this and not take the Blood Rot. So what we can do is we could block with Boulder Drop and Felling, cover the 6, and then just pitch Fruits and Rootbound to Sledge. What I think we should do instead is just block with Boulder Drop. We can take 5 here from 3 from Infecting and then 2 from the Blood Rot, and we just Felling for 8. We will decompose. We'll bottom our own Rootbound Carapace. Choosing instead to play a more aggressive line, what I can do here is play the Felling, pitch Fruits, bottom Rootbound Carapace, and then have the opportunity to pummel. And I guess that's what I'm looking for, is just saying if you don't block, if Riptide just blocks 6 here, then we end the game with pummel, and if Riptide doesn't have a defense reaction, and the game just ends. So that is what I'm going to look to do, I'm sure. If I don't play the pummel here, then that just seems like a mistake. Riptide giving us New Horizon says we are still going to play the pummel. This puts Riptide down to 1. I suspect the New Horizon block is Riptide anticipating the pummel, given that we've had the same card in our arsenal forever. We'll take 2 from the Blood Rot trap, and now we just start drawing into hands that will end the game. This line seems like an easy Icequake Sledge, Arsenal Rootbound Carapace, so that we have the ability to play it, and we get it out of our deck. The risk here, of course, is that we are sledging for 9, which is going to take at least 3 cards from Riptide, and Riptide on 1 card won't be attacking us, which means this Rootbound might just rot in our arsenal. But we do know that we're coming up on some Oakenolds with Crumble to Eternity, so even if we're just sledging for 6 every turn, then we are steadily running Riptide out of cards in deck and just drawing into our win con, which is dominated Oakenold. Instead, we find a Terra Sunder, so what I'm going to want to do here is just E-Strike for 5 go again, bottom Boulder Drop, and then Sledge for 6. We send 11. If Riptide has Collapsing Trap, that's the worst case scenario. We could Terra Sunder, pitch Channel. No, that doesn't work because we can't pay. Oh, we do have Tunic. So we could play Terra Sunder, pitch Channel, then Tunic, E-Strike, Boulder Drop to Sledge for 7. That doesn't seem very good. Riptide's only out here is Collapsing Trap, which we know he has pitched. The question is, has he drawn it? And if he has, he still needs to give us 2 cards. and if we discard 2 blues and then draw into a 3rd blue, we can still sledge using our tunic. Instead, we find Riptide without the collapsing trap. We are just going to follow up with the sledge, take 2 more cards, and we're very much ahead on deck count right now. We find Oakenold, a blue, a crumble, and that's going to be enough to end the game. And if for whatever reason it isn't, then we will just draw another blue within the next 2 cards of our deck and do the same thing again. Or maybe we draw a yellow and a red because that's what we know our pitch deck looks like, and that even pays for Oakenold. So that is enough to get there, though. Riptide does not have a way to block the dominated Oakenold, and we're going to coast to a victory. I know this wasn't a particularly compelling game. It was my first game against Riptide with Count Your Blessings. It's like, oh wow, this is very favored for us. Later this week, I'll have a deck update video for my personal Jarl list, which does include Count Your Blessings, and part of that is just how strong it is in these grindy matchups, where we can really take advantage of pitching 2 blues to attack with Sledge. Very strong strategy against slower decks that aren't pressuring us so much, and I'm excited to start implementing that in the future, and for you all to implement that too. The list is already online and updated. I just don't have a deck tech for it quite yet, and that'll be coming out later this week. I hope you enjoyed this game. I hope you learned something. If so, be sure to pummel that like button. My comments are always open for any questions or feedback. If you haven't already done so, please consider a YouTube subscription. It's free. It helps me out a lot. I have a Blue Sky, a Discord, and a Patreon, links to which are in the video description below. Until the next time I see you on Daily FaB Gameplay, stay frosty.